Say hello and welcome to Let's Talk. I'm John Kane, and we've got Regan DeLoggins on the line. We're ever trying to resolve some of the technical issues as we do continue to do this show remotely. We are looking forward to this program in particular. Regan has a guest that will be joining us after we get started. First off, Regan, can you hear us all right? Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can y'all hear me?
Yep. Can you hear me? All right. I guess you are.
Yes, loud and clear.
It's all about plugging everything in. All right. As we continue to try to figure out better solutions for what we're doing here. For those who've listened to the show in the past over the last few weeks, one of the biggest awkward parts of what we're doing is there was a significant delay between Regan's voice and my voice. And that was making it somewhat difficult to know how to to really converse without there being that uncomfortable pause and then both of us jumping in at the same time. So hopefully we're resolving some of that.
I hope.
All right. Well, a couple of things. We are going to be talking about the gas line, and you have a guest that'll be joining us, and I'll allow you to do that introduction when we begin that. I don't see him on the Zoom, by the way. So you got to make sure.
Okay, I just sent him the link again.
Okay, once I see him up there, I can admit him to our party. But there's other stuff going on. I just did a show the other day, and it's funny. The topic I said is, how does it feel? And part of it I didn't want it to come across as like, oh, there, now you got it too. But maybe a little bit I did. And what I was talking about is this federal agent, this use of federal agents in Portland in particular, and of course the threats to use them in all these other, especially cities that have Democratic mayors or in states with Democratic governors. Native people have been abused, harassed, arrested by federal agents in the form of everything from marshals to border patrol agents for decades. And I got to assume, and based on some of what I've had, some conversations I had with some of the folks down south, this is along the southern border. And I don't mean on the border. I mean within 100 miles of the border, as well as the northern border. So, as I see what's happening to a broader segment of American society, including joblessness and poverty and all that other stuff, it's like, man, we've been dealing with this stuff for a long time. And, so I think part of what we're seeing and what we're, I guess experiencing is an awakening by people who are, man, they're being treated like they're black or native. I mean, and I know this has got to be terribly uncomfortable. And don't get me wrong, it is wrong. I mean, it's wrong, for anybody to be treated that way. But I guess until more people experience some of this stuff, I mean, hell, even I think even the mayor of Portland got gassed last night, from what I understand.
Yeah, he did.
So I mean, this is an unusual. I mean, look, I think Nixon did this over some of the anti-Vietnam, and civil rights issues back, but this is a new modern phenomenon and it's really what everybody feared when after 9/11 and the whole Department of Homeland Security and development and it being the blanket for all of these other agencies. This is what everybody was concerned about. I mean, forget about deep state stuff. This is about abuse of authority at the federal level that usurps states, it usurps cities, it usurps constitutional rights, all that stuff. I don't know. Give me your take on how this thing is playing out.
Absolutely. I think that. So first, I want to commend people, specifically in Portland, for showing up every day in solidarity with Black lives. I think that one of the reasons that people are so appalled as to what is happening in Portland is because it's a largely white population of people who are being abused and being assaulted by the police. I also really do appreciate that you brought up 9/11 because I've been reading a lot of books recently about the emergence of the police state. And I think it's important for people to understand that a lot of rights in terms of the militarization of police in terms of our constitutional rights. I say our as for those who identify as American. A lot of them changed after 9/11. Historically, there was a huge shift in what was determined as a right in terms of like free speech, in terms of the right to organize. So I would advocate. It's something that I've been reading a lot about for some time now, but I would advocate that folks begin to read about the history of police militarization post 9/11. There is quite a bit of there's some books out there on it. There's some great articles out there on it. And if you read these books that were published, you know, at this point, what is it, like 18 years ago? Was 2002 is when this particular book came out that I'm thinking of. So almost 20 years ago, like, we have to start to consider that this has been a part of the police state, a part of the settler state all along. This is not new by any means, and Black and brown people have been affected by these laws, by these changes in legislation more than white people, and now we are seeing it exercised on white folks in a way that is incredible. Like, it's violent, you know, it's so violent. As you said, you know, people are getting tear gas, people are getting beaten, people are being taken in unmarked cars with Florida license plates, being told that if they follow the car, they'll be shot. There are National Guard. Like, it is. I've heard the term war zone used, and I don't personally love using that, considering that there are, you know, so many people that have escaped actual war zones. But I will say that this is militarization. This is an occupation, and this is, in many ways, illegal.
Well, and even like the Patriot Act and all of these other, you know, and again, keep in mind that the Patriot Act is an acronym, and it's about providing all tools. I mean, that's what it's all, you know, to, you know, I don't remember exactly, I can't remember it all, but it's providing all tools against terrorism. And of course, surveillance, and again, utilizing other means to suppress dissent. You know, the funny thing about, I think it was in some of Snowden's stuff, they, he released information that showed specifically about how native territories, Mohawks in particular, were targeted during, you know, in the post 9/11 stuff. And look, we've been challenging federal government, you know, going back to Oka and, you know, Gunyonge, Alcatraz, all of this stuff going way back. But yeah, so I mean, the whole post 9/11 does create, you know, threats that maybe for most people they have never considered, and because it's never impacted them directly, it's always been the others that have been impacted. That's what's kind of, you know, that's why I did the last show when I say, how does it feel? Because I hope it doesn't feel good, because this is what we've been experiencing. And the other thing that I gotta say is, look, Black people and Native people, brown people, we've been experiencing oppression. We've been experiencing poverty and unemployment and all of this stuff. This isn't new to us, and you know, and this has been said by other, you know, historical analysts who have said we're the ones who are going to, you know, come through some of the worst types of social, economic, you know, geopolitical collapses than anybody. It's the people who have never had to experience it. They've never had to experience the type of adversity that, and I'm not saying, you know, I'm glad we went through it, but I'm just saying it's you know, added a couple of layers of skin to us, you know.
I also, something that is unique to Portland in terms of these uprisings is that a lot of the people participating, as we said, are white, but also a lot of them are super young. And I say that as a young person myself. I'm in my 20s. I'm not, you know, not for long though. My birthday's in a couple months and I'm finally hitting the big 3-0. But I think that that's something that is unique to a lot of movement spaces, is that this is a lot of young people taking to the streets in a way that we haven't seen. I mean, we see it here in New York all the time for Black Lives Matter. There are young kids of color in the street here holding it down for their families, holding it down for their kin. But we don't really see the same kind of call that in white communities. And so it's interesting to me to see, like yesterday was this, what was it? It was like moms on the front lines.
Yeah, I just heard an interview on that. It's great.
Yeah, it was a bunch of white moms.
Wall of moms, I think they called it. Wall of moms.
Yeah, wall of moms.
Yeah,
exactly. And they showed up. They had shields. They had bike helmets on. They had goggles. They had masks. Like, they were there to protect these young people who are being targeted through this militarized police violence. And though that, even though that brings me joy to see white people actually on the front lines committed, it also reminds me how few white people showed up when Black and brown folks were being violently attacked in the streets here, particularly in New York City. And I also want to say that there have been a number of dads with leaf blowers blowing back tear gas, which I'm in love with. I'm in love that these moms, these dads, these people are coming together in real ways to push back. And I hope that this continues, and that the next time, because unfortunately there will be a next time, the next time a Black person is hunted down in the streets by cops, that this same level of commitment I now expect it from white people. I saw them do it in Portland, so I expect it in New York. I expect it in Chicago. I expect it in Atlanta. I expect it in all these cities. So I think that Portland has really created a precedent, and now there's an expectation that is held, because I know y'all can do it, so y'all better do it.
Well, and the interesting thing, getting back to the wall of moms, as I listened to an interview today, the one representative of that group in Portland was saying, we took our direction from the Black Lives Matter movement. We didn't go there asserting our agenda above theirs. We asked where they'd like us, whether they wanted 2 walls, 3 walls, however, and so they respected what was caused, who was behind these rallies, protests, whatever you want to call these gatherings in the first place, but offered their assistance as not as taking charge, but as offering assistance. And so even that was kind of impressive listening to some of this. But you're right. Other cities need to step up. And and now that you've got Trump specifically threatening cities like New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, Detroit, especially cities that have Democratic mayors and in states with Democratic governors, you can tell that this is all about him using his power to take shots at political enemies, and there's no question about that. And it's not to say that there aren't challenges in every urban environment, whether it's whether they've got a Democratic governor or a Republican governor in the state or a mayor or whatever. But it's I think this is really where people need to step up. This is unprecedented. And back to your other point, the other thing that is interesting about looking at Portland is, when you go back to the anti-war movement and some of that stuff, it was real easy for Nixon or Wallace or any of these guys, even Humphrey at the time, to look at the activists as a fringe group of hippies, as they used to call them, the hippie fanatics or whatever else. And that's not what you have. Even you look at the diversity, even across the young people who are participating. It isn't. I don't think there's one stereotype that fits it. And as that movement grows and there's more participation across, skin color, whether it's religious beliefs or political beliefs. Yeah, look, I know there's always going to be real adamant fringe that are political, that are driven by politics more than anything else. But this is about rights. This is about safety, and I think that's what's coming through with a lot of this. We still got you, Regan? Oh, what happened here?
Can Can you hear me?
Yeah, there you are. Oh, did you mute yourself
Okay.
as you were getting
I
checking with
did.
Tom?
I muted myself so that you wouldn't get any feedback from me, but I forgot to unmute myself. But what I was going to say was that I really hope this momentum continues. And I know that there's been a call for action on Saturday for folks in different cities to stand in solidarity with Portland. And I really hope that happens. But I also really hope that this is not co-opted, that this doesn't become a Save Portland thing. Because in the end, this is a Black Lives Matter protest. These are Black Lives Matter riots, if you will. These are Black Lives Matter. Like, that's where this is rooted. And so I really, really hope that this doesn't become a co-option of save the hipsters in Portland, because that's not what we're trying to do. That's never been the point of this. And so I am apprehensive to see what next steps look like, because co-option is very real. But I am also excited that the momentum continues. And I really do hope that people show up and out on Saturday throughout the nation for Black Lives Matter, and to stand in solidarity with Portland protesters who are in solidarity with Black Lives Matter.
Now, the interesting thing is that I told you I listened to an interview earlier, and the representative of the Wall of Moms was a black woman, even though a lot of that Wall of Moms they aren't. But she's a black woman, and she didn't pull any punches on the mayor of Portland. She said, in spite of all the praise and the acknowledgement he's getting for having been tear gassed, she condemned the fact that he has not been outspoken enough, and his words were too soft. So I think making sure that there's still voices in places that matter to say, look, we still can't be tolerant of those who have some level of complicity in the status quo, and even some of the people who go out to these marches. They're making sure that they are utilizing these platforms for a message that may not be what these events were all about. So I agree with you, but I'm also glad to hear, at least today, listening to somebody who wasn't going to sit there and just heap a bunch of praise because this mayor happened to be, and I don't know, I didn't see video of him being tear gassed, but. It's one thing to breathe a little in and make your eyes a little water. It's another thing to have somebody, gush pepper spray into your face or whatever else, which so many people have experienced.
There's also a difference between being tear gassed in a moment of performative accomplishment and being targeted by the police all your life for being black.
Exactly. That's a perfect point to be made here. So yeah, exactly. All right, hey, you got a guest that is joining us. We know that while pandemic continues and social justice issues and police abuse issues continue, we are always and still in a constant battle over environmental degradation. And while Native people are on the front lines of resisting pipelines cutting through or going by their territories. There are plenty of pipelines that have been proposed that have a sordid history in terms of how they get to be where they are. And you have a guest that you've lined up with us. Although I do see he's still. Oh no, he's not muted. All right. So I'll let you go ahead and introduce TR.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we get started, I guess it's important that I give a little background. There is a pipeline being currently built right now in Brooklyn. That is fact. It is happening. If you go down Manhattan or Montrose Ave, you will see them doing the construction. This North Brooklyn pipeline has been, it's been in works of being built for about a year now. Oh, sorry, there's a big loud truck going by, of course.
That'll
Perfect
happen.
Timing. Yep, as of course. So there has been a number of groups that have been organizing together in order to bring awareness to folks about this pipeline that is coming through Brooklyn. So one of these orgs is EarthStrike, and my comrade, my friend, a co-organizer, Tom, is here today to discuss, to have a conversation about what is going on with the pipeline. So Tom is a radical decolonial and environmental activist and researcher, as well as an artist and a writer who's been in the mix of Lenape hooking for over 30 years in support of Indigenous, Black, and Brown folks. His current engagements are with FOBK, which is a group that I'm also in, which stands for Frack Out of Brooklyn, as well as EarthStrike NYC. Tom, are you there?
I am. Thank you for having me. And let me say greetings from Mohawk Haudenosaunee territory, land of the people of the Longhouse.
Well, and I'm joining actually from Seneca territory. I'm Mohawk, Gunyagahaga, Haudenosaunee. We are connecting from my studio in Seneca territory, in the Cattaraugus territory of Seneca Nation, to WBAI via our all-star Reggie Johnson. Yeah, we always have to acknowledge kind of who we are. As a native person, I sometimes forget to do that because I'm wearing it, I guess. But thank you for that. Nice to meet you, by the way, Tom. Nice to meet you.
Honored to be here, dear relatives.
It is wonderful to have you. For those who are wondering, Tom is a dear friend and comrade and colleague, and someone who I've been organizing with just recently and have been super inspired by. And I'm just really excited to have you here today, Tom, as someone who I think is possibly the smartest person I've ever met, beyond my father, probably. You know everything about everything. So I'm really excited that you're here in the studio with us to talk about the pipeline.
I'm pleased to do so. Where should I begin?
Well, how about we start with a little background as what is this pipeline? What is the pipeline's purpose?
So when we talk about the North Brooklyn Pipeline, we're talking about a business proposal that has originated from National Grid. And National Grid's proposal, which has been in the works for a number of years, and the period of actually bringing it up to what's called the Public Service Commission as an essential component or centerpiece of what's called a rate case, which is a case in which a utility company negotiates or presents a case to the state to allow it to increase rates on consumers of electricity and gas and so forth. So the whole business plan, which is actually from their perspective an investment plan, is packaged in one of these rate cases. But the purpose of the build out of the pipeline infrastructure in particular that's a part of this proposal has two versions of reality, right? One that's unreal and one that's real. Let me start with the unreal. The unreal version of that National Grid would have us believe is that this whole project is about a couple of different things, or several. Replacement of aging infrastructure, something they call LPP, leak-prone pipeline, where there are a number of pipelines as there are in any urban area across the United States, or so-called United States, and so forth, where aging infrastructure for gas delivery to the populations therein is like breaking down. That's one thing. They also are talking about installing infrastructure specifically related to demand issues, peak demand issues, long-term demand issues. That goes under the rubric of what's called the Metropolitan Reliability Infrastructure Program. And it involves like building liquefied natural gas facilities in the Greenpoint area, along with the pipeline, the pipelines that are being built at this very moment through North Brooklyn, through communities like Brownsville, and Bushwick and other communities. Another piece of it is that they want to enhance the throughput, and by throughput, that's a term of art that they use for just increasing the volume of gas that can flow through a given pipeline. They want to increase throughput on an existing pipeline that at some point in time was given the egregious settler name of the Iroquois Pipeline.
Of course.
Of course, yes. Colonialists never fail us. So,
Yeah, at least they didn't call it the
They-
Redskin pipeline, I guess.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. At the end of the day, it's a snake when you take the clothes off. So the plan is to enhance the throughput of this pipeline by compressors, which would allow them to have more gas coming into this area from locations north. John, could you let Regan back in?
Oh,
They're
she,
asking
no,
to
she
do
just,
that.
I think she muted herself. She's doing that, but.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah. Oh,
Great.
no, I see. Oh, no, I did lose her. Okay. I see that. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
as
this
you're talking about
Iroquois
that, though,
pipeline
is
yes, go ahead, John.
is the Williams pipeline the one that was supposed to be coming in, across water? Is that something that's also a big part of that throughput, which is a euphemism for dramatically increasing its volume potential?
You see, that's the crux of the matter, John, and thanks for bringing that up, because that leads me right into my next point. So this so-called egregiously named Iroquois pipeline, which was supposed to bring in additional gas from eastern Canada, is actually a part of what we actually call the plan, that activists and folks on the ground who are fighting against this particular version of the snake know as Williams Plan B. And what happened in the past year is that just this past year is that the Department of Environmental Conservation denied Williams its permit on the basis of water quality and other environmental considerations to go ahead with the Williams Northeast Supply Enhancement Pipeline, which, as you and Regan know, I'm sure, and other folks might know, was a pipeline that was planned to span across New York Harbor into the Rockaways with the purported purpose of meeting long-term demand projections for gas in that area. But when you actually unwrap what's behind Williams Plan B, you get a very different picture of what's involved. It really constitutes more or less a fallback position to secure long-term investment interest in the wake of the denial of the permit for the pipeline. Williams and National Grid are actually investment partners in a strategic sense in this region, with National Grid providing the facts on the ground, the infrastructural footprint, the reason d'etre, as it were, for establishing these throughput projects with these massive pipelines coming out of the Marcellus Shale in this area, coming out of the Permian area in Texas, etc., because of the larger economic picture where, the fossil fuel industry, the extractive industry as a whole, is in disastrous financial straits. So that's really the big picture of all this. But to get back to the Williams Plan B, what they're talking about is that it would require about $185 million, and that's a minimum investment, by the way. It doesn't include the sky-high likely total that's involved with like the LNG infrastructure facilities that are also a part of this longer term. And they want to do that over 3 years. Of course, all of that would be debt serviced by loans from banks. And the debt service on the loan would be paid by ratepayers through the increases in the rate case. Really very clever. They get the ratepayers to pay the service on their debt so that the banks can make money on underwriting the loans at a huge profit over what they pay for the bonds. And long-term, the return on investment and profits goes to the banks and National Grid. The public gets to be locked into fossil fuel infrastructure long-term with increasingly adverse impacts, climate change, public safety, public health, and the utility, and it would have been Williams as well, but the utility and the pipeline companies that are involved in the banks get to reap mega profits, as they always do, pursuing their colonialist ends. So that's my recap on the pipeline's purpose. Oh, one more thing. The whole thing is structured. If you look at the way that this works globally, let's just take so-called North America, for instance. You have the Keystone Access Pipeline. You have the whole Keystone system, which includes the Keystone Access, which includes the Keystone, the KXL, which is the Export Limited, the original Keystone, which was the phase one. You have the Trans-Canada in so-called British Columbia, threatening the Unistoten Nation. And of course, as always, our indigenous relatives, my indigenous relatives, are on the front lines of the extractive economy, battling all those things. And this is just another manifestation of the global pattern of colonial imposition of resource extraction that has, as you and John were pointing out in your remarks about Portland, all of these manifestations of historical process have a very long history. And in this particular case, it's an additional opportunity for a long-term shoring up of the finances of the energy sector. And they want to put these facts on the ground. And one of the things they want to do is to move things forward for the purpose of export, naturally, because they have an oversupply of product, which has been driving the price down, along with the COVID pandemic and other things affecting, and universal activist opposition to development of fossil fuel infrastructure, etc. It's a bad environment for them. They need to find a way to get this stuff out of the country and into the hands of people that will buy it. Alternatively, they're building petrochemical industries in West Virginia. I will say again, correcting myself, so-called West Virginia, and other locations where the throughput that can't be sold is being used to produce plastics, which in itself is an extremely polluting and energy consumptive process in and of itself. So,
TR,
short,
go ahead. And Regan, we're at the bottom of the hour, so let's take a break. I'll have Reg take us out with a little bit of music, and we'll come back. When we come back, I do want to talk about. There's something really egregious about the way these things are put out there piecemeal in order to minimize what looks like the overall environmental impact. Yet we know that they're part of a much bigger plan, as you talked about. So we'll talk about that when we come back. We'll take a brief break here. Reggie, you'll cue up some music. This is John Kane with Regan DeLoggins and her comrade in arms, TR. We're talking about pipeline. Again, this whole idea of gas being spoon fed to us, and we'll talk more about it when we come back. This is Let's Talk with John Kane and Regan DeLoggins. We're talking about the pipeline, the Brooklyn pipeline, and others, of course. But first, let me say again, as always, we put a call out to listeners of WBAI and listeners of this program to support WBAI and to support what we do here, what our mission here is to to offer a perspective that you're not going to get anywhere else. So I ask people to go to the website www.give2wbai.org. That's GIVE, the number 2, WBAI.org. Make a donation of any size. Do it in the name of Let's Talk with John Kane, and we'll get a certain amount of credit. I say credit, but it is. It isn't financial credit. It is credit for the work that we do. So I ask you that you do a donation in the name of this show to WBAI. All of the proceeds go to cover the costs of WBAI, and they are significant. I also ask you to go to the pledge line. If not, do it online. You go to 516-620-3602. That's the number to call to make a donation. You can become a WBAI buddy, and again, you can list Let's Talk with John Kane as the show that you're joining in the name of. You can do a one-time donation. Look, I realize that there are many people that have been negatively impacted by COVID-19. But if you are one of the people who still has some disposable income, this isn't disposable. This isn't throwing it away. This is an investment. It's an investment in your education. It's an investment in you becoming not just woke, as they say, but just aware of things that impact you, not just that impact others, but impact you. So again, 516-620-3602, that's the number to call to make a pledge to WBAI, and please do it in the name of Let's Talk with John Kane and Regan DeLoggins. All right, let's get back at it. Regan, why don't you reintroduce your guests, and we'll pick it up.
Sure, of course. My guest is Tom, who is a member of the FOBK coalition, which is the Frack Out of Brooklyn coalition, which I'm also a member of, as well as EarthStrike. He's a writer, an activist, a decolonial baddie, if you will, a comrade, and was just letting us know about the purpose of the North Brooklyn pipeline in terms of being for extraction and export, as well as who is building this pipeline, which is National Grid, and how it's being fiscally sponsored, and how ratepayers, which is us, people who are connected to National Grid, who use it for our our heating, our cooking, or whatever, are expected to pay a rate increase in order to allow a destructive pipeline to go through North Brooklyn. So I guess, Tom, my next question for you would be, how did this pipeline move forward right under our noses? And I say right under our noses because it was purposefully covert. But I would like, if you could elaborate a little bit as to why this was able to move through with very little public intervention.
Sure. Actually, the way that the planning process has worked, and it's a damning thing in and of itself. It's the normal function of the way that the institutionalized system of energy provision within the state, as well as elsewhere in the so-called USA, takes place, and elsewhere in the world as well. The planning process in this case, and in the case of New York, in its early stages, it's only subject to public input in a very limited sense. So you have the company beginning to float its investment plans and do the initial belt and suspenders kind of compliance, have the compliance and kind of conversations they have with PSC, and if necessary, if it's a large infrastructural process that brings in federal regulatory agencies, they would have to have conversations with what's called FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So they go through this process, and it's really undercover, and in fact, it's one could almost say that it's almost institutionally structured, that the lack of democratic input, of community input in this is like inherent in its nature. Until finally, what happens is that the plans which have fully been developed in these kinds of consultative and developing processes within the companies themselves, acting in cahoots as business partners, and by the way, the revolving door connections they have with state legislators, politicians, commissioners, business councils, New York State Business Council, for instance, being one, that's an avid supporter, been an avid supporter of fossil fuel and extractivist investments for many, many, many decades. So finally, these various factions decide that, and it's a theater, right? They put these things into public discourse through these kinds of cosmetic public hearings, like the one they had in late May. Oftentimes, only when there's like extreme, like viewed as strident, by the way, demands by the public for the same, and the rate cases themselves, right? The public hearings being like a cosmetic kind of promotional attempt, as this last one was for National Grid, to present their findings and their investment plans to the public, to be able to say that they did, without really even allowing for adequate public input or even really listening to what people say. For instance, there were hundreds of people who tried to call in on that public hearing, and they weren't able to make a connection, weren't able to have their say, their questions weren't answered. All you had were these kind of benign, ambiguous slideshows that were produced by National Grid, showing the various steps of their programs and everything else and what they wanted to do. Par for the course. Not, covert, Regan and John, is par for the course, which is no surprise given the society we live in, unfortunately. So even in the rate case, what you have is a situation where key deliberative segments of the process are structured so that the information that's communicated within them as well as the the ability to participate. It's not shareable with the public in real time, but it's only available to people who are registered as parties to the case, and parties to the case who should disclose information at various stages of the rate case that they signed on or agreed to in their agreement to be parties, and they wind up doing it anyway. They can be excluded summarily from the rate case and from future rate cases, by the way, going forward. So again, the lack of public access, the lack of community input is manifest. There was neglect of public input or public solicitation within the North Brooklyn community to begin with from the get-go, par for the course. No dialogue with community residents, including, for instance, e.g., small businesses that would be affected by the actual construction. Environmental impacts were not fully assessed or vetted in their proposals. Nobody had a chance to challenge those proposals to begin with until the rate case proceedings, when once again, they're hidden except for access to a few parties. Par for the course. For example, there's a huge issue which has been an issue of much that's involved a lot of falsification and manufacture of consent on the part of the fossil fuel industry in general regarding methane emission levels with an end-to-end pipeline infrastructure. Never fully vetted, never fully expressed. A colleague of mine presented a full laundry list of scientific findings and analysis suggesting that, in fact, confirming that the industry position regarding end-to-end methane emissions that's 86 times more potent than CO2 over the couple of decades short-term environmentally.
And this pipeline is going under a public school.
That's right. It's going under a public school, and aside from being disruptive to businesses, as I was saying, it's manifestly being done and executed without public foreknowledge or input any whatsoever.
Hey Tom, I wanted to mention.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's another question that I had, and you alluded to it a little bit. There's this myth that everything from Bakken crude to the Marcellus Shale development for gas, that this was all about energy independence, and that this was all to satisfy the insatiable appetite in the domestic supply. But the fact of the matter is that there's a large export component to all of these things, including natural gas. And people don't think about it in terms of natural gas. But these liquefied natural gas sites are geared towards exporting natural gas. The tar sands oil, all of that destruction of the boreal forests on the Canadian side was all for export. The bomb trains that deliver Bakken crude from the Dakotas all the way across the country to New York and down along the Hudson River, that is going to Atlantic ports for export. So, the part of the thing that's really problematic as far as I'm concerned with this stuff is not only is there a lie being told about where some of the market is for this stuff, but they're using their investment in this thing as a reason to hike the rates up. But there's never an offset for how much profitability there is involved with this stuff as it relates to export.
That's all extraordinarily excellent points, John. In fact, the whole project all such projects can be looked at as, at this current moment in our economy, as attempts to shore up the disastrous prospects of the fossil fuel and extractive industry in the name of satisfying demand, which actually is manufactured and doesn't exist. One of the very reasons why frack gas companies are in such financial trouble is way back, starting with 2004, when Cheney created his Halliburton backdoor that allowed for the implementation of a lot of frack gas drilling over and above, at that time, existing environmental standards which would have prevented it. There were these hugely over the top projections of not only capacity development but of marketing development. And what happened is that because it's easier to go ahead and produce more from, say, we'll take the example of extreme energy. In the microeconomic sense, it's easier to produce increasing quantities of the stuff than to actually create an economy of scale that's actually like tailored to the market and is sensitive to market demand. You have a situation where these people are driven, in addition to the market signals they're giving to investors who are responding by priming the pumps with more money. Well, at least they were until a few years ago. More and more stuff was being pulled out of the ground. There was a huge expansion of fracking infrastructure throughout the country in the years from 2005 to current. Let's say 2015 to 2016, when the crisis of overproduction began to set in. And then what happened is that they had all of this excess capacity that supposedly, as you pointed out, was supposed to guarantee energy independence. Well, why was the overproduction necessary if energy independence was the only thing that was on the table? The obvious answer is that the excess throughput was supposed to be exported or plowed into petrochemicals. But a few things happened to knock them off their rocking horse on that. One was the overproduction itself, which drove down prices, which made it impossible for the fracking companies to maintain the liquidity of their assets. So enormous numbers of them went into bankruptcy. For instance, in the year, I'll read just a few quick statistics. In 2015, there were $27 billion in bankruptcy debt. 2016, $82 billion in bankruptcy debt. 2017 and 18 and 19 together, almost $100 billion in bankruptcy debt, and $55 billion in bankruptcy debt in this year alone.
Well, and let's be clear.
Yes, go ahead.
Bankruptcy debt isn't just debt that goes away. Ultimately, we all as consumers pay for that debt in one way or another. We all pay for that.
Indeed.
And it isn't just about the damage that a company incurs. It is damage that we all have to shoulder.
Indeed. And the bankruptcies themselves, in terms of numbers, are approaching 300 through 2015 to current. So, as you were pointing out very astutely, I think, the whole idea of energy independence was just a cover story for an attempt to actually increase the plutocratic dominance.
A marketing scheme, a marketing ploy.
Yes. The colonial.
For profit. Yeah.
In other words, let's call it what it is, right? Like non-metaphorical colonialism.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, right.
Yeah. Well, I know we only have a couple of minutes left here, so I wanted to, first of all, Tom, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
You have so much information. And to finish up, I guess, our interview, though, I assume that as this continues to unfold, we'll continue to have more conversations about it. What can folks do to get more involved or to get more educated about the North Brooklyn pipeline? What are there some steps that they can begin to research or look into in order to become more familiarized and hopefully participate in advocating against the pipeline?
Sure. First of all, I think Regan, as you and I think John as well, we admire diversity of tactics while insisting that radical decolonial politics should be centered and are indispensable. So I will start out with saying that I think that while there are a lot of really great groups that are working more in, say, the mainstream that are wonderful to be involved with, the first thing that I would tell people to do is to call the following number if you want to be involved. Area code 929-515-1312, which happens to translate the last four digits into ACAB. If there's anyone that wants a translation of that, I'd be happy to give it.
I also would say that. Oh, go ahead, Tom.
And I would also like to say that there's a No North Brooklyn coalition that you can also sign on with. depending on what your druthers are with regard to the radicality of your involvement. This coalition is also doing excellent work and also attempting to make connections within the real community, unlike a lot of the other settler environmental groups. And they're at https www.saneenergy.org/no NBK pipeline, one word.
Of course, there's also a movement for divestment, boycott, and sanction. It isn't just an Israel thing, the DBS thing. We recommend that people do find out whether the financial institutions that you utilize are investing in this, and find and do your own research. This is something anybody can do. Anybody can do to find out whether the financial institutions that they utilize, that they pay, for services, are somehow involved in any of this stuff. And I know that seems like a leap from more direct action, but I'm saying this at very least.
No, diversity. As Tom said, we appreciate a diversity of tactics. Divestment is part of that. Getting educated is another part. And then join, if you are also interested, check out the Instagram FRACKOUTTABK, which is FRACKOUTTABK, Frack Outta Brooklyn, which is a Black, Brown, and Indigenous-led effort to stop National Grid from building this toxic pipeline through Brooklyn.
That's us.
That's us. That's me, Tom, and a bunch of other wonderful organizers. So please follow us on Instagram if you're interested, and we'll continue to let you know how to get involved with phone zaps, with our zine. There's a bunch of different ways to begin to really agitate, because it's our duty to do so. Thanks again, Tom, for being here. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thanks, Tom. You're a great guest, and man, Regan, you got awesome friends.
I try.
Hey, folks, our shows are put out as a podcast. You can listen to this in an archive off of WBAI.org, but we will present the podcast. We will package this up as a YouTube video, so look for this podcast along with my other podcast at Let's Talk Native with John Kane podcast, and look for the video on our YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV. Thanks again, and we will be back next week. So, Regan, thank you very much. Great show, and thanks for doing what you do.